Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture we will be designing the login method. So in the previous lecture we have successfully signed up the user via this main activity, which is nothing but our sign up activity. And once the user is signed up, that is once we have the user credentials, what we could do is that we could go ahead and redirect the user to the login activity or the login method. So the first thing which you need to do obviously is that you need to create a new activity, and we are going to go with empty activity. And in here, let's name this activity as, let's assume, login activity. So here I'm going to type in login activity, then click finish, and the activity should be created for us. Now this activity is also going to have a similar layout. That is, we are going to have two edit text, one for email, other one for password, and then we are going to have a button. So let's quickly go ahead and design that. So that's going to be a linear layout over here, and we are going to set the orientation to basically vertical. And after that, let's go ahead and start adding the edit text. So that's going to be edit text, match parent, wrap content. Let's set the ID as, let's say, @ID user email. And after that, let's specify some hint like, let's say, enter email. And after that, let's go ahead, create another edit text with match parent and wrap content as the width and height. Let's say the hint here says enter password. I misspelled password, that should be password. Let's give it an ID as @ID, and that should be user pass. So once this thing is done, let's set up a button as well. So that's going to be button, match parent, wrap content. Let's say the text on the button says something like let's say login, and also let's set an on-click listener which says something like, let's say, sign in button clicked. Okay, so once we are done with this, we are basically done setting up the layout. Now let's go ahead and design the logic behind this login activity. So let's go inside the login activity.java, and in here you need to get a reference to both of the edit text. So let's declare the edit text as private edit text, and that's going to be user email and user password. And after that, let's also get a reference to the Firebase auth. So that's going to be private Firebase auth. Let's name it as mauth. And after that, let's also get a reference to the database. So we will type in private database reference database. So once we have it, the next thing which we do is that we go in the onCreate activity and assign it an ID for the user email. So we'll type user email equals edit text. That's going to be find view by ID .id.edit email for the email, and for user password we will type this equals edit text find view by ID .id.edit pass. So once we have these two things set up, we are basically good to go. And now let's go ahead, get a reference to mauth as well. So that's going to be mauth equals firebase auth.get instance. Now if you have difficulties understanding these things, then feel free to ask me out in the Q&A section, and I will be there to help you out. Now the reason why I'm explaining each and everything is because some of you might have a slower learning pace and you might feel a little bit difficult to grasp things. So that's the main intention behind me explaining this so many times. I know for some of you guys it would be quite slow, but I'm trying my best to keep it short as well as explain each and everything. So after that, what we need to do is that we need to get a reference to the database as well, because if you open up our database, let me just open up the Firebase console. So let me just go to console.firebase.google.com, and in here, if you have a look at our database also has users entered into it. So for that purpose, what we need to do is that we need to check if the user is actually present over there. So for that matter, we do need to have a reference to the database as well. So if you go to new food order, and if you go to database over here, we should have our successfully registered users over here. So as you could see, this is user number 1, and here we have the user number 2. Now the actual users are stored in the authentication tab. So these are the users who will be using our application. So yeah, that's the reason for having it. So let's go ahead and get reference to the database as well. So that's going to be mdatabase equals firebase database dot get instance dot get reference dot child, and the child under which the users are stored is nothing but its users. So go ahead and type in users over here. So that's going to be users, and after that we are good to go. Now the next thing which you need to do is you need to define what happens when you click this particular button. So on clicking this button, we want to log in the user. So we will type in public void, that should be sign in button clicked. Let's pass it a view. And what this should actually do is that first it should extract the values from these two edit text. So that's going to be string email equals user email dot get text dot toString dot trim, and we will have the second string as pass equals this is going to be user pass dot get text dot toString dot trim. So once we have these two things, we could use the sign in with username and email method. But even before that, just so as to avoid errors, we need to check if these two fields, that is the email field and the password fields, are not empty. So we'll type in if that is going to be not textutils dot is empty, and check for the emptiness of email and check for the emptiness of the password as well. So that's going to be not textutils dot is empty and pass in pass over here. So if this thing happens, that means both the fields are not empty. We want to use the sign in with email and password method. So we type mauth dot sign in with email and password and pass in the value for email as well as password over here. Now once this thing is done, you could add an onComplete listener to it. So that's going to be dot onComplete listener new onComplete listener. So once we have this listener, we should be good to go. Now the next thing which we do is that in this onComplete listener method, or this onComplete method, you create another method if the task is successful. So we will type if task dot is successful, that means we are good to go. So for that, what we will do is that we will create a method which is going to check if the user actually exists in our database or not. So we will type in check user exists, and in here what we will do is that we will create a method down right here. So right now we don't have this method, so let's type in public void check user exist, and what this method is going to do is that it's going to basically first get the current UID from the mauth. So we will get the current UID from mauth, and we will go ahead and compare it with the UID, which is nothing but this UID right here. So if you have a look at this thing right here, this is nothing but the UID or the unique ID of each and every user. So if those UID matches, that means we have that user registered in our database, and only then when the two things actually match up, we want to basically go ahead and sign in the user. So here what we will do is that we will create a string with type final. So we'll type final string, that's going to be user ID, and let's get the user ID from mauth. So mauth dot get current user dot get UID. So that's going to grant you access to the UID of the user, and after that let's add a listener to the database. So mdatabase dot add value event listener new value event listener. So after that, once this thing is done, what we will do here is that we'll add a semicolon, and what we want to do here is that we will check if the user ID matches up with the ID which we have extracted from mauth. So in order to check that, we type if data snapshot dot has child user ID, which means child actually has the user ID. Then what we want to do is that we want to start a new intent, which is going to be menu intent, for a new activity which is going to be called as menu. So we'll type in intent menu intent equals new intent, that's going to be current activity which is login activity dot this comma, and that's going to be menu activity dot class. So once this thing is done, you simply need to start the activity for menu. So what this essentially does is that once the user is authorized, it's actually going to go ahead and start the new activity, which is menu activity. That means unless and until you're signed in into the system, you won't be able to access the menu over here. And the main purpose of signing up user over here is that we want to make sure what is the name of the particular username who is going to order certain items. So that's the reason for having a login over here, or else you don't actually need a login for this application. Okay, so once this thing is done, we are good to go. So the final thing which you need to do is that you need to go ahead and create the menu activity, which is going to basically list out the food items from the database. So that's it for this lecture, and in the next lecture we will begin with creating the menu activity for displaying the menu. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.